खुदा में रज़वी हो।
Allah Almighty has commanded us in numerous places in the Holy Quran to obey Him and to obey His beloved Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and this is the foundation of the life of a Muslim. That whatever we have, whatever Allah has given us in this life, the lives that Allah has bestowed upon us, is so that we may use it in being obedient to Allah. And you cannot be obedient to Allah if you are not obedient to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when we say obedience to Allah, it means obedience to Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alaihi wasallam. So whatever we have, everything that Allah has given us, it is so that we may use it as a means to please Allah. We may use whatever Allah has given us as a means to please Allah and to please His beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if you go back 1400 years and more, you will find that this was the manner of the Sahabiyah. This was the way of the companions of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that whatever they did it for the pleasure of Allah. They did it to please His beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They didn't do things for dunya and for name and fame. Even if they performed some worldly act, that aim and the objective was Raza Ilahi. Their pleasure, their aim was to please Almighty Allah. And indeed, they are the most beautiful examples of obeying Allah and obeying Allah's beloved Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. If they were commanded to give their wealth, share their wealth for the deen of Allah, they did not think. They shared their wealth. We know the waqi of Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. We know Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu anhu. We know the waqi of Hazrat Uthman bin Noori radiallahu anhu. How many times he gave his wealth for the pleasure of Allah and for the deen of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have seen the generosity of Hazrat Mawla Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Whenever they were commanded, they did not hesitate. When they were commanded and requested, and when the Nabi requested anything from them, they knew that the request of the Nabi is a command. They knew that the request of the Nabi is a command, and they took it as a command. If they were requested to put their lives on the line, then they were willing to sacrifice their lives for the sake of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were willing to sacrifice their wealth. They were willing to sacrifice their families. They were willing to sacrifice their properties. They were willing to sacrifice their own lives. But they were not willing to compromise the deen of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were not willing to compromise the deen of Allah and His beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You will find that the companions of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam were completely sincere and dedicated in what they did. They were devoted in their love for Almighty Allah and their love for the beloved Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alaihi wasallam. And you will find many beautiful examples. There are numerous examples like this in the history of Islam and in the lives of the companions of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where they were willing to sacrifice everything for the pleasure of Allah and in the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And why is this? Because they understood better than anybody that success in the dunya and in the akhirat is by coming to the feet of the beloved Rasul. By coming to the beloved feet of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they knew that. Would say the Ala Hazrat Adimul Barakat radiallahu Imam Ahle Sunnat manifested in his poetry when he said, Ba Khuda Khuda ka yahi hai dar. They knew this, that by Allah, if you wish to reach the court of Allah, then humble yourself and sacrifice everything in the love of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And a beautiful example of this evening after Maghrib will be the 15th of Shawwal. It will be the 15th of Shawwal, and it marks a very historic day in the history of Islam. It marks the day that the Battle of Uhud took place. 15th of Shawwal marks the day that the great Battle of Uhud took place. It is a very great lesson for the Muslim Ummah until Qiyamah. It is that battle where we learned numerous lessons. And everybody learned how important it was not to move even a fraction away from that which the beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam commanded. Not even a fraction. This is that time. Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud took place on the 15th of Shawwal in the year 3 Hijri. You must understand, and I'm going to give you a little bit of quick history. When the Battle of Badr took place, the Kuffar were in ruins. You must remember, numerous of their leaders were killed. They were in complete disarray, they were aggrieved, they were disillusioned, they didn't know what to do. But after the Battle of Badr, they started planning to avenge what happened in Badr. Plan to avenge, fight against the Muslims, against the beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to get ready for a battle. And they started to amass a huge army. And in that battle, in the battle which they intended to fight, became the famous Battle of Uhud. When the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you must remember in that time, during that battle in Uhud, the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam went with 1,000 people, 1,000 soldiers. And the Kuffar in Makkah came with 3,000. The numbers were bigger on that side. And when the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard that the Kuffar are coming towards Madinatul Munawwar, the aim was to attack Madinah Sharif. And the beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam sat down a meeting of the people of Makkah, and he said, what do we do? I'm being brief. Do we fight from inside Medina or do we go outside? And there were different views. Some said let's fight from inside the city, some said let's fight from outside. There were different views, and finally, I'm not going to go into the depth of the history there, but finally the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam took the Muslim army and they went to Uhud, where they met with the Kuffar in Makkah on the plains of Uhud. And one of the people that didn't want this to happen was the munafiq of the time, Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul. He didn't want this battle to happen like this. He wanted his own way. And that is why when the Battle of Uhud commenced, he took 300 of his men and he went away. And he left the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam with 700. He took his 300 roughly and he left. Why? He showed his hypocrisy. I didn't have my way, so it will be done like this. They did this even in the time of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is where the start of hypocrisy happened. This is where they claim to read the kalima of the beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They claim to be with the companions of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They rode shoulder to shoulder in the battle, and when the time came for anything happened, they went away. They fled. That Battle of Uhud at that time, the companions of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I'm being brief because time does not permit, they fought bravely. And in that battle, the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw that on the mountain pass in Uhud, that area was an easy place for the kuffar to attack from. So the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know the waqia, placed 50 archers. Where? In the mountain pass. With who? Hazrat Sayyiduna Abdullah ibn Ubay. 50 archers were in the mountain pass. And the beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did he say? He said, no matter what happens, no matter what happens, you should not move from your place. Even if the Muslims are victorious, don't move from your place till I don't say. I'm being brief. Don't move. This was the Battle of Uhud. And what happened? When the war took place on the plains of Uhud and the battle took place, the Muslim army overwhelmed the kuffar. They started to become victorious. And what the kuffar did, they fled. They started to flee. When the Muslims saw that they are fleeing, the Muslim army was excited. They became pleased that the kuffar are now fleeing from the battlefield. So they started to enter certain areas, and what they did, all the spoils of war that were there, they started to take it. Those companions that were on the mountain pass, those 50, amongst them they had a difference. Some said, let's go down. Some said, no, we can't. The others said, but the battle is over. Even if we go down, we're not going against the command. Battle is over. And a group of them decided, a huge group of them decided to come down. And the moment they came down, and the mountain pass was not fully guarded, at that time, Hazrat Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, Hazrat Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu, was not a Muslim as yet. He was the commander, one of the commanders of the non-Muslim army. He commanded an offensive from behind that mountain pass. And they started to attack the Sahaba of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it was in that battle the holy tooth of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was made shaheed. It was in that battle that the holy tooth of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was made shaheed. And Shaitan spread a rumor, the whispering that the beloved Nabi has been martyred. But the beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not martyred. But this confusion was spread. And when the companions, a lot of them who had just come newly to the deen of Almighty Allah, when they heard that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was martyred, this news that was not true, a lot of them, when they heard this, what happened? They began to backtrack. They thought, what is going to happen without the leadership of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And there was a state of disarray at that time. A lot of them began to retreat because they didn't know what would happen next. And at that time, the companions of the beloved Rasul, who were with the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, etc., they announced that do not retreat. Allah's Nabi is still with us. Allah's Nabi had been brief. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is fine. At that time, the Sahaba Ikram got strength and himmat again, and being brief. And then they entered the Maidan again, and they fought the kuffar, and Allah gave them victory. But for that moment when they had started to retreat because of the spoils of war, because they left the place, those who were put there, this was done so that they would learn a lesson. And there will be a lesson till Qiyamah, a very great lesson, that never move even a fraction away from that which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, and said that it can be taught to them that even in a time when you were being overwhelmed, Allah gave you victory over the kuffar. And those companions that retreated at that time, they didn't do it out of animosity, they didn't do it out of enmity, they did it because there was a situation which could not be understood, and they were told that the beloved Nabi has been made shaheed at that time. And unfortunately there are those fitna makers and those agents of the Razvis who saying that at that time, ma'adallahi rabbil alameen, the companions of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam absconded. They left the Prophet and ran, ma'adallahi rabbil alameen. This cannot be said against any Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the love that one Sahabi has for the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if we take all of our love and put it together, it won't be one zarra of the love of a Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this you can witness in the lives of numerous companions of the beloved Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alaihi wasallam. And I'm going to give you one example and finish today. Let me give you an example that probably you've heard of, never heard. But this happened in the battle of Uhud. There was a Sahabiyah. There was a female companion of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Hazrat Sayyidatuna Umara radiallahu ta'ala. Umara radiallahu, and she had gone with her husband and her children to accompany them, not to fight. Because women and children are not allowed to fight. They are there for provisions and other needs. And she accompanied her husband and her two sons. What did she accompany them? So that she may be with them. Her husband was Sayyidina Zayd ibn Asim radiallahu anhu. Her one son was Sayyidina Habib, and her other son was Sayyidina Abdullah radiallahu anhuma. She had gone into the battle with them, and when her husband went into the field, onto the plains of Uhud, listen to the hearts. When her husband went into the field, Umara radiallahu anhu, into the battlefield to fight against the enemy, because at that time they were trying to attack Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They wanted to harm Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though none can. But they wanted to cause taklif, and their intention was to martyr the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the time when the people were in disarray. So they tried to attack the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and her husband was one of the people that stepped into the plains of Uhud at that time, sword in his hand. And when she saw that her husband had gone into the field and it was a very difficult time, this female companion, Hazrat Sayyidatuna Umar radiallahu anha, she took a dagger or a sword in the hand and she lunged into the Maidan. She lunged into the Maidan with both her sons. And when she got in, at that time somebody had fired an arrow and he had thrown a spear towards the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as she saw it coming, she turned herself towards it. She turned herself towards it and it struck her in her back and formed a gaping hole. It formed a hole and she stood in defense with her husband and her children. When her one son, when he was injured during the battle, her son Hazrat Abdullah, when he was injured, he says that my mother ripped off a part of her chadar and she tied it on me and she said, get up and go and fight against the enemy in the love of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Go in the Maidan. And she fought so bravely. The person that tried to attack Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she struck him with such force that if he was not wearing armor, his body would have split in two. His body would have split in two. It is stated that during the battle of Uhud, she had more than 13 wounds on her head and on her back. More than 13 wounds on her head and her back. And she was so devoted in the love of Allah and His beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam that she did not leave anybody that came in her way. And when Hazrat Sayyidatuna Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, when she saw that the person, there was a person trying to attack, and Rasulullah said to her, this is the same person that tried to kill your son. She went out in front and she defended again. And she wiped him and cleaned him out. But at that time, when she saw this, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam smiled at her and he said, oh Umar, be grateful. Oh Umar, make shukr, be grateful that Allah has blessed you with such strength and such vigor that you have fought in the way of Almighty Allah. On that day, look at their Bahadri, she's a female. She went into the Maidan for the love of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And when she heard Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saying this, and when she saw the smile of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, she said, Ya Rasulullah, I have one dua at this time. Ya Rasulullah, I have one dua at this time. The beloved Nabi said, oh Umar, what is your dua? She said, Ya Rasulullah, my dua is that myself, my husband and my two sons should be your companions in Jannah. We should be your companions in Jannah. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made dua for her and he said, may you and your family be my companions in Jannah. Indeed, she and her family will be the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Jannah. And she always used to say, she survived this battle. Alhamdulillah. After so many wounds, she survived this battle. And she used to always say that if I have to put all the hardships of the world on one side and that one dua of Rasulullah, the plains of Badr or Uhud on one side, that dua is sufficient for me always. And this is not just like this. These incidents and this narration has been presented with immense detail by Shaykh Muhakkik Shaykh Abdul Haq Muhaddis Delvi radiallahu anhu and great other muhaddiseen on the bahaduri and the bravery of this great woman of Islam. So it is something that we should understand. And let me tell you, it is a lesson for our mothers and sisters. It is a lesson that look at the qurbanis that they gave. It is a lesson for us to teach our family to love Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam with their hearts. It is to teach them that we have to make minor sacrifices. And yet we complain. Look at the grand sacrifices that they had to make in the love of Allah and His beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why did they do this? What was the reason for this? The reason for this was because they knew that in the obedience of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there is nothing valuable. Neither is your life precious, nor is your wealth precious. Everything is sacrificed in the court of Allah and His beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imagine being wounded severely. One wound alone was so severe that it formed a hole through, a gaping hole in her shoulder, and still more than 12 to 13 wounds on her head and her body, and she's still standing there in the love of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How is this? With so much of discomfort, so much of taklif. What is this? Very simple. What Allah Hazrat Alim al-Barkat radiallahu anh said, he said, Jaan hai ishq Mustafa. Jaan hai ishq Mustafa. Roz fazu kare khuda. Jisko ho dard ka maza naze dawa uthaye. Those who loved this pain in the love of Rasulullah, in the love of Allah, why would they want to treat it? They knew that every moment that I spend in the pleasure of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be my means in the hereafter. So this great battle of Uhud, there are numerous great incidents, and in this battle of Uhud, I have not gone there too much in detail because we've discussed it many times. We know that Sayyid al-Shuhada, Hazrat Sayyiduna Amir Hamza, radiallahu anhu, and the other companions who were martyred on the plains of Uhud were martyred on this day. Hazrat Amir Hamza radiallahu anhu's Mubarak Jism, Mubarak, his nose and his ears were removed. His Mubarak body was mutilated at that time. His liver was chewed on. But why all this? Why all this? For the pleasure of Allah and His beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He gave his life for the pleasure of Allah. He was the most beloved uncle of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So think about this, that when these Mubarak days come, and I've discussed this very briefly. I've tried to put all of this into a small space of time so that you understand and realize that when these days come, they are very important days in the history of Islam. We should not forget it. We remember all the important historic events of the kuffar. We remember everything else. We don't remember the historic events of the deen of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when you go home tonight after Maghrib, is the 15th of Shawwal, don't forget, in your home, make the Fatiha of the Shuhada. Remember Hazrat Sayyidatuna Ummah radiallahu anha. Remember the companions who were made shaheed on this day. Remember those blessed companions who always put their lives on the line for the pleasure of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yet today it is so sad that the Sahaba Ikram gave us this deen. They gave us this deen that we receive today, which they got from Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam by growing this great tree of Islam and by nurturing it with their blood. And today we are not prepared to make even this much sacrifice, that don't compromise and sit with the enemies of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Don't sit with Bad Mazhabs. Don't sit with Wahhabis. Don't sit with Razvis. This is Sulh Kulliyat. I'm going to go on saying this so that you remember that this is detrimental poison. We need to understand that if we are going to compromise our deen, then in the dunya and in the akhirat we'll be zalim. We'll become disgraced here and in the hereafter as well. Look at the lives of the Sahaba. Go back 1400 years. Look at their sacrifice. Look at what they did for the pleasure of Allah. Look at what they did in the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Learn from them. Every time that shaitan tries to entice you, because that's shaitan's job. Shaitan wants to entice. Every time that shaitan tries to entice you towards compromising Allah's deen, always remember what the Quran says, that the kuffar entice you towards hell and Allah is inviting you towards Jannah. Allah is inviting us towards, is calling us towards Jannah. Why do you fall into the ploy of shaitan and leave that which Rabbi Kainat is promising you? If we do what is right in this dunya, and if we hold firm to our deen, then this dunya is our slave and the akhirat is our place of, our abode of comfort and luxury. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us tawfiq to understand. May Allah keep us firm in the love, in His love and the love of His companion, beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the companions of His beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah protect us, Allah protect our deen, Allah protect our iman. Those that are ill in our community, Allah grant them shifa.